Welcome to the Property Podcast, the home of news and debate about building long-term wealth from property investment for beginners and experts alike. And now for your hosts. They may not be as cool as me, but they do know their property. It's Rob and Rob.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. You're back for week 6, and my co-host, as always, is Rob Dix. Welcome back, Rob.
Hi, Rob. Good to be here.
I'm pleased to say that everyone is listening to the UK's #1 investing podcast, apparently, according to iTunes, which is great news. But rather than us going on about our rankings again, Rob, why don't you tell us what we've got coming up this week?
Yeah, we'll have to make some time for our content after we finish banging on about that. We are going to be talking this week about how to find a property investing hotspot. And we're going to talk about some fundamentals that underlie where you should be investing as well. We're also going to have a look at some news that's caught our eye this week, and we're going to finish up with a great free tool that we both use and that I now can't imagine living without. So that's well worth sticking around for.
The tool we actually use for the podcast, our businesses, our personal lives. So if you're not using this tool, you're definitely going to have to get hold of it. But before we get going, we did promise that we would read out every 5-star review we receive, and this week is no exception. We've had a lot again this week, so massive thank you to all of the following. A round of applause to you. Okay, Manny says, excellent advice for newbies, excellent stuff. He does comment that we don't talk about the negative side of property, so we might have to do something there, Rob, and talk about, the pitfalls, which we're more than happy to do. And he says, please shout out his company, CNC Searches, a conveyancing search company. So there you go, Manny. There's your shout out. Thank you for your review. Dan Sheard, really good podcast. I'm addicted. Can't wait for the next one. Highly recommended by SimTechMT. Listen to the first 3 podcasts. Give me the kickstart. I need to take things forward. Many thanks to myself for the advice. We chatted over the phone. I remember that call. That was great. Nick Stott from Homeshore Property in Liverpool. Great start to what I hope is a growing resource in property investment advice. Nice tone, style and structure. Looking forward to hearing more. And then Spud Murphy, great idea. Very down-to-earth, informative information. Some great suggestions also. Inspiring. I would strongly recommend subscribing. Well, thank you very much to all those we just mentioned. We'll have some more next week, but we really do appreciate your reviews. It's helping this podcast take off and some. So thank you for all those who have left a review. And if you do want to leave us one, we will, of course, read your name out and thank you publicly at some point in the future.
Thank you. It's absolutely amazing to see all these reviews piling up. But could I also please give a shout out to our one listener in the Dominican Republic? I was looking at our stats as I do every 10 minutes or so. And I noticed that the vast majority of our audience is in the UK. But we've got a smattering around the rest of the world, including one in the Dominican Republic. So if that's you, please email us and tell us what the heck you're listening to us for.
But thank you anyway.
Yeah, thank you anyway, wherever you're listening from. All right, Rob, well, we should move swiftly on to talk about what we've been up to. So what's been keeping you busy this week?
Well, the normal RMP work stuff. However, it's been a really great week because the podcast, a few episodes are out now on iTunes. I've had a lot of conversations with people who actually listen to the podcast. So it's been a really, really good week. Some of the people I've been able to help directly, and some, my company's not ideal for them, but I've pointed them in the right direction. But I really applaud people who pick up the phone who just want to find out a bit more about property. And I'm always, I know you are as well, Rob, if you're always open for people emailing you and getting in touch. I know you've spoken to a few people yourself, and I'm always happy to have a conversation with anybody who wants to be pointed in the right direction. Thank you to the people we spoke to. A special thank you to David, because not only was I able to pass a bit of advice on to him property-wise, but he gave me a ton of SEO information as well for my website and pointed me in the right direction on a few bits and pieces. So thank you, David. I appreciate the conversation we had last week.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's worth mentioning that, like you said, not everyone's going to be someone you can help, but I think it's worth mentioning that whenever you speak to someone with a view to getting involved with something in property, anyone reputable will be willing to tell you when they're not a good fit and be willing to pass you on to someone else who might be able to help you more. I'd always be very suspicious of someone who says, oh yeah, I hear what you're saying about steady long-term gains, but have you thought about flipping? Because it's just a sure sign that they're just trying to get you into their system and start marketing stuff to you. They're not really looking out for your long-term interests.
You're so right. There is no one strategy fits all. It doesn't exist. Everybody's different. Everyone's circumstances are different ages, different starting points. So anybody who says, my product's perfect for everybody, I'd be very, very wary of them. That's a really good point, Rob.
Okay, well, I've been busy this week because my wife and I are off to Berlin tomorrow, so I've been getting ready for that. But I've also been on the road meeting some investors, so I'd like to give a shout out to Sam Collett, who's got an amazing blog called whatsamsawtoday.com. It's all about the things that she spotted in auction catalogues. She does really well buying at auction and has some really funny things about, she rounds up like different roads and areas of woodland that are for sale in different auction catalogues she comes across. And I know she's got a book coming out soon as well, which is going to be great. Also, I was spending some time in Wolverhampton with Arsh and Aki, who have got a letting agency up there. And they've also run a website called DSS Move. It's dssmove.co.uk, which is basically Rightmove, but for people who receive housing benefit. Because on Rightmove, the vast majority of properties are not available to people on housing benefit. And so they've done a whole portal where every single property is. It's a really interesting extension of their business, and it's providing a great service. So I really enjoyed spending the afternoon with them.
Sounds like you've had a good week. What Sam saw today, or Sam from What Sam Saw Today, is a good contributor on Property Tribes as well. I often see her coming up with some really good, valuable posts on there.
All right, so what's been catching our eye in the news then? What have you got for us this week?
Rightmove has released their house price index numbers. Nothing over the top or crazy coming out of there. However, there's a few things worth pointing out and looking at. House prices have continued to rise for 4 months now. I think spring is always a good time for property prices, traditionally, and people start to look at putting a house back on the market again after Christmas and New Year out of the way. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me. What is interesting, though, that the transaction volumes are still low, which slightly contradicts what I've been reading in the Sunday Times this week from Ernst & Young, who expect house transactions to increase this year and then to see property prices then go up next year. I think what we're seeing week after week, Rob, at the moment is a lot of good news stories. There doesn't seem to be the doom and gloom out there as much.
Yeah, and we of course never know how much of that good news is genuine and how much it's the media deciding that suddenly everything's good and really it hasn't changed that much, but it's still nice to see some indicators. And then I spotted as well in that report that London is the only region that hasn't seen a price rise recently. So perhaps that reflects that London's been kind of running away recently for reasons probably not that related to property, but more to do with storing wealth. And now that's kind of starting to reach some kind of peak, and the rest of the country is catching up a little bit.
You could say that London may be a hotspot.
I like the link. I like it a lot.
See what I did?
Yeah, indeed. You could say that London has been a property investment hotspot, and that's what we're going to talk about as our topic of the week. And it puts us squarely back in Daily Mail mode, really, doesn't it? Like a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about prices rising hundreds of pounds a day, and now we're talking about hotspots, which is a very media-y kind of thing. Because if you read the papers, there always seems to be somewhere new that's being marketed as the hotspot. I went through and picked out a few. The Daily Telegraph is tipping Bristol and Canary Wharf at the moment. If you're a This Is Money reader, you might have already piled into Hartlepool. If you're reading MSN, maybe you're already going around some estate agents in Market Harborough and seeing what's available. Or Montenegro, they were tipping as well, if you want to go further afield. There always seems to be some kind of new hotspot. I know my co-host has some strong views on this, but I'm going to ask him to keep zipped about that until we've got a little bit further into the topic. Maybe to start with, we should go through signals that are a good sign that you've got a property hotspot on your hand. We've got 4 reasons. Maybe you can start us off, Rob.
Yeah, and this doesn't just apply to the UK. This can be worldwide, because people often talk, as you said, Montenegro. People talk about UK hotspots and worldwide hotspots. You hear things like Cape Verde mentioned and other places around the world that you may not necessarily think of straight away. But these are the things that would indicate a hotspot. So major regeneration is the first thing we've put down on our list. I don't mean a new Morrison's supermarket open. I wouldn't class that as major regeneration, although I have seen things like supermarkets opening in marketing brochures to try and say that prices will rise off the back of it. Not quite sure that would make much of an impact. However, Liverpool being a prime example, the Liverpool One development there, which was £1 billion just on a very small area of the city centre, I would class that as a major regeneration project. And sticking with Liverpool, just because I know it well, the Liverpool Waters project, which hasn't started but planning has been approved for a lot of it. If you Google Liverpool Waters, you'll see a lot more about that. It's by the Peel Group. But that would be classed as major regeneration. Massive projects that are going to have an impact on the area.
And related to that, point number 2 is a change to the transport links in an area. Which makes sense, because if you've got an area that suddenly becomes more convenient or more commutable to nearby areas, it's going to push prices up. In London, there's an example of that, because we've got Crossrail coming up in a few years' time. It feels like they've been digging a place up for years, and we're still about 5 years away. But that's going to be extending west out to Maidstone, I think. And people are saying that that's going to increase prices further out, because it gets easier to commute into London. Which maybe is true, but then at the same time, you've got to be aware that there's no guarantee that prices will move just because of transport links. There could be other factors that are holding prices down where they are.
Transport links is a good one, but as you say, it's not the only thing you should look at. But the high-speed 2 line going to Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds, the journey times are rapidly reduced going into London. Would that have an impact on prices? We'll discuss that in a bit, but they're the type of things people look for. The next one is government intervention. So that might be in the form of tax breaks or EU funding. There's a few different subcategories here. So if a country was to reduce the tax on property, such as stamp duty or something similar, then that might increase prices. Equally, EU funding, if a city is allocated new EU funding, that then also may push prices up. So government intervention, whether it be in a form of funding or tax breaks, may also have an impact on prices.
And the final point that we've got, which I snuck in, it sounds like it's contradicting what you said earlier, Rob, about not a supermarket opening not being a sign of major regeneration. But I'd say follow Whole Foods, because they put millions, probably billions, into figuring out where to open branches. They're looking at long-term trends and trying to figure out what areas are going to be coming up. They're spending more time and money on it than you can, so why not piggyback on their research? The caveat to that, I suppose, is that they can afford to be wrong for longer than you can. It's like the shares thing, like the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. And it's like if they're wrong, they can afford to pull out, and maybe it's going to be harder for you to do that. But you can start looking at these early signals that other people have spotted potential in an area.
Don't worry, Rob. I don't think I've contradicted you there. I think your point is a good one, because what I was saying is I don't think the supermarket then makes the area. I think the supermarket have identified the area. So just because the supermarket's built, the area isn't going to go crazy. But if the supermarket has targeted that area, then it may have potential.
Okay, Rob, time for your note of caution.
Thank you, Rob, because I have held myself back. So we've talked about hotspots. I don't believe in them. To me, hotspots is marketing spin. If somebody tells you this area is a hotspot and the next big thing, switch off, you've already missed the boat. Because once the marketeers have got their hands on a hotspot, then everybody is piling it. So you're not first to take action. You're behind the curve. Don't follow it. It's not to say don't invest, but don't think you've bought a hotspot that's suddenly going to start flying up in price, because hotspot normally means the marketing boom has happened in that area and the best opportunity has passed. So we look for something else. We look for fundamentals. But Rob, you've got a good example of hotspots.
An example there's that I bought in King's Cross probably about 6-7 years ago or something. And that is now being talked of as a hotspot because there's all this regeneration work. There's Google moving in. Sainsbury's have moved their headquarters there. There's a new housing development. There's lots of work on the station. There's all this talk about the things that are going on. It's being touted as a hotspot. It was not being talked of as a hotspot 6-7 years ago when I was buying. Everyone thought I was mental because the place was a bit of a hole. As it happened, I wasn't being clever. It's just the only place that I could afford to buy to live at the time. The point is that I wasn't chasing the hotspot, and by the time people are talking about it as a hotspot now, prices have already gone up, you've missed the boat, and it's like you say, it's the marketing machine. Again, it's like the stock market. It's like, what makes you think that you know better than everyone else who's out there? By the time you find out about something, chances are it's already priced in. I think you can see the same thing in property. Possibly with London is a slight exception, because some people say that London, there's so many factors that are bringing people to London. Every area will eventually get gentrified as people need to move to areas with slightly lower prices. I'm not sure I buy into that. I think on the whole, it's not a game you should play. If you see some of these factors as well, then great. But essentially, we should be looking at fundamentals.
And that's what we're going to come on to next. So hotspots is a short-term mindset, people looking for quick gains and quick wins. Fundamentals is what you should be looking for when you look for an investment. If you get a small surge or uprising in property prices, great. But that's not why you've gone into this area in the first place. The fundamentals is a long-term approach to property investment. So what should you look for? We've told you what not to look for, what to avoid, the marketing and people saying this is a hotspot. So what you should be doing your own independent research. What have we got first on the list, Rob?
Okay, well, the first thing, which is a really good sign, is transport links. Not a chain, not new transport links like we're talking about with a hotspot, but transport links, because they're really, really important. It's something that everyone cares about. And so it means that it's going to be far more rentable if it's got good links into town and to most places of work. In London, there's a nationwide report that claimed that you paid a £20,000 premium to live 500 metres from a station compared to similar properties 1,500 metres from a station. So that's a sign that transport is important. And we're not really talking about values, we're talking about long-term rentability and demand and everything else. But transport is clearly something that is going to be a factor that everyone considers whenever they're looking about where to live.
The next one is just as important as well, is that the property is close to a major town or city, or within a major town or city. The reason why, you can find a great deal, but if it's in Nowhereville, Are you always going to have that tenant demand? Will that area always do well in their price increases in the future? Possibly, but possibly not. So what you want is a place that is commutable. It's relating back to transport links, but is commutable to a major town or city or within one, because that's where the majority of the jobs are, the employment and the schools and everything else. So you want to be close to a major town or city, because over the long term, that should put you in better position when it comes to increasing values.
And employment is the next point we're going to come on to. It's, again, something that affects almost everyone. So good local employment is going to keep people in the area, which is good for rental demand, and it's good for long-term prices as well. Be a bit careful if there's just one big local employer. That means that you've got to be a little bit careful in case they close down and suddenly everything changes. But a good mix of industries, of strong local employers is always a good sign. You can do the opposite, like Aki and Arshu I was with in Wolverhampton last week are in an area of high unemployment, and they've got a model which works brilliantly there. If you're talking long term, if you're talking like normal buy-to-let, then you want to be looking at a good mix of employment that seems to be steady and growing in the long term.
And the next one is shops. People need to eat, people need to buy products. And if they have to travel away from the area to get to the local shops, from the small things for a pint of milk and a newspaper to the larger things, their weekly shop and all the other goods and services they may require, if the immediate area has those facilities, then again, long term it's likely to do well. I know these seem like a lot of common sense principles, but sometimes people ignore them. Make sure you're listing these down if you're new to property, because you want to make sure you tick all these boxes. Shops is another one you should be looking for.
And finally, another biggie is schools. Again, something that's going to be relevant and important to a large number of people. Again, there was a Zoopla report that showed that properties that are near the 100 best state secondaries are worth 25% more than the regional average. And there's an LSE report that backed that up as well. And that's not directly relevant, but it's a good sign that people will want to rent nearby for the long term. And of course, if you've got a tenant who's got kids at school, they could be staying there for 6-7 years. And so that's always a good sign if you can be near a network of good schools.
I'd like to give everyone an example of an area that sort of ticks all these boxes. And no, it's not because I've got an investment here. I haven't. So this is a completely neutral recommendation. If you look at a place somewhere like Warrington, for example, Warrington has excellent transport links into London, Manchester, Liverpool. It's right on the motorway as well, on 2 different motorways. It's close to its own major town. It's close to Manchester and Liverpool cities. It's got excellent employment levels. There's a massive science park there. So there's some high-tech jobs as well as the normal traditional retail jobs. Lots of shops, lots of schools in the area. It ticks all the boxes now. And that's not to say that you should now all run to Warrington and buy there, because there's plenty of other places. But that's just a tangible example that you can say, okay, I can see an area that ticks those boxes. So when you're investing, look for areas like that, because over the long term, you should always do well.
I think, like you say, Rob, it all looks like common sense when you write it down, but it's very easy to get distracted and just be looking at the numbers and get excited about an area and go, oh, look at the yield, that's great. And maybe there is in the short term, but over like a 20, 30 year time horizon, that could easily change if you don't have the transport links, the shops, the schools, the employment, the everything else. So even though it sounds like common sense, I think it's a great checklist to have. So when you see something that looks exciting, you can go, okay, well, let's not get carried away. Let's see whether it meets all these criteria.
You know what, Rob? That's why I'm not doing this on my own, because that's such a good point. People do get blinded by yields and numbers. I wasn't even going to bring that up, and that's a really, really good point that I hope people are taking on board, because the amount of people that say, well, this has got a better yield. But if it's in an old mining town that has, terrible unemployment, awful transport links, then yes, you might be able to get a better yield there, but is it a better investment long term? And you really, for most people, you should be viewing property as a long-term investment. So that's a really, really good point and takeaway there.
That's our summary then. It's how to find a property hotspot. Don't worry about it too much. Focus on the fundamentals instead. Tick all those boxes. If you happen to have these indicators that prices might rocket in the short term, then good for you. But that's not something that you want to be basing your long-term decisions on.
Hopefully you've had something to take away there. And I'd like to give you something else as well. Our resource of the week. And this week our resource is Dropbox. So for those who don't know what Dropbox is an online storage facility. You might be able to sum this up better, Rob, but it's a place where you store online documents. It's like having a computer in the cloud. And I don't mean in the sky, I mean somewhere virtual. So you can always access your documents wherever you are and whatever computer you're on if you download your Dropbox. We share our files for the podcast. I have Dropbox that I share with my designers and other people within my team at RMP. And I also have my own personal stuff as well, photographs and so on. But the great thing is, wherever I am, today I'm not in the office, nor am I at home. I'm actually in a hotel because I've been away for the weekend. And I'm sitting here in the hotel room on my laptop, and I've been able to pick up my files on a laptop that I don't normally use because I'm using Dropbox. It's a super tool. You should really have a look at it.
Yeah, it works for so many different reasons. It's the backup. It's the fact that you can share with people. The great thing about it is that once it's running and once you've been using it for a while, you forget you're even using it because it just happens. The trouble with backup solutions normally is that it's a bit of a pain and you don't back your stuff up and it all gets out of sync. With Dropbox, it just happens. I'd kind of forgotten I was using it because it just sits there in the background and takes care of it. And every so often, I'm in a hotel or I want to share something and there's all my files and they're all up to date across all my different devices. So Dropbox, it's free. I think you get up to 2 gigabytes, which is quite a lot. And then you can pay to go up to 20 or 50 or something like that. But it's well worth looking into. I think if you compare up Dropbox with Evernote, which we've talked about recently as well, that is the recipe for tech happiness.
It is. It's a great tool. And it's also a bit of a lifesaver because I've had my main computer go down before, blue screen, the computer's dead. And if I was using my normal work files on the computer, I would have lost thousands of pounds worth of work, hours and hours of work, research, a lot of the business information, a lot of family photos. I didn't worry because everything was on Dropbox. And if that's ever happened to you, stop listening to the podcast, go and get Dropbox because it'll never happen to you again.
Okay, well, we'll leave you with that and just say thank you very much for listening. You can go and find the show notes for this episode at thepropertypodcast.com/6. And we've linked up everything that we've talked about in this episode and given you a little summary. You can also sign up for our mailing list there to make sure that you don't miss anything. And you can leave us a comment as well. We love getting all the iTunes reviews, but you can leave us a comment on the website as well. And so we can have a bit more of a two-way discussion and ask us anything you want or chip in and let us know your thoughts. Let us know what you'd like us to cover in future weeks and have a bit of a conversation.
Who's going to be the first person to leave a comment? We'd love to engage with you. We've got thousands of listeners. It's incredible. We've got loads of reviews. We thank you for that, but we'd love to talk to you. So I know some people are emailing Rob and calling in to my office, and that's great, but if you want to just casually talk on the website, thepropertypodcast.com, please do so, because we will reply. We're a friendly pair.
We are, and we're very much into being social, which links us into next week's topic, which is...
I like it, Rob.
I'm learning from you. Next week's topic is using social media to learn about property. It can be a huge time suck, and it's a lot of people kind of sort of struggle to see the point of it, but we're going to hopefully show you how you can really get further faster with property investment by tapping into some of the social networks that are available for you online.
We're going to give you the best people to follow, the best people to connect with, the groups to join. We're going to give you all those resources next week, so make sure you listen. It's going to be a cracking episode, I promise you.
Well, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you at the same time next week.
Yeah, we'll join you all next Thursday. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Property Podcast. Don't forget to check out the show notes and join the mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.